Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast, where we bring you the latest insights from across the Scottish red meat sector, from the public body that works on its behalf. I'm Claire Taylor, your host for today's episode. Join us as we dive into market trends, brand communications and industry development projects in relation to Scotland's red meat sector, featuring experts, guests, farmers and stakeholders. Together, we'll explore the key facts and perspectives shaping our sector, keeping you informed and engaged with the ever-evolving landscape of the red meat industry. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You and the team have had a busy start to the year. What has been keeping you occupied?
Thanks, Claire. Yes, well, 2025 has certainly blown in, I think, with the storm last week, which has been the big challenge of the last few days, just making sure we can support farmers, processors and a couple of businesses who have been impacted quite badly through that. So yeah, January is always a funny month for us. Going into the final quarter of the financial year, we have a couple of kind of key internal deadlines, particularly around our external audit. So because QMS is a non-departmental public body, we're audited by Audit Scotland, so that audit takes place. We have a controls audit that takes place in the next few weeks, and then our final audit that takes place at the end of the financial year. So lots of work just making sure we're getting finance systems and papers and reports all ready for that. So quite internally focused for some of that. But the team have been, as ever, out and about. We've had some honoured farm meetings, some really fantastic meetings over the last few weeks. We've been down in London at the Taste of Scotland event, which we'll talk about a bit more later on. And we've also been busy delivering some demonstrations to Gordon, did a demonstration to some vet school students last week. So yeah, it's always on here at Quality Meat Scotland.
And Sarah, of course, in the programme, we're going to be hearing from James Withers, who is an independent commissioner as part of the UK Farm Assurance Review. Are you able to share a little bit about that and what QMS's reaction has been to the findings so far?
Yeah, and actually this is something that personally I feel quite passionately about. If we rewind the clock back to April 2022, when I took on the Chief Exec's position, one of the things that I really heard from at the time we did a kind of roadshow around Scotland to hear from our farmers was that they were really unhappy with how our assurance schemes were being delivered. And, you know, ever the optimist, I felt there was an opportunity there to kind of turn things in around and look at how we did things. So we implemented a programme of change back in 2022 looking at some of the things that have now been referenced in this report. For example, making sure we have more farmers on our standard setting committees. For example, making sure that communication is, first and foremost, before we look to change anything, and making sure that timelines are really clear with particularly the farming community. If we're putting out a new set of standards, how do they hear about it? At what point do they hear about it, rather than treating them as an afterthought? So for me, a lot of what I felt the commissioners were looking to do already aligned quite strongly with how I felt we needed to look differently at quality assurance. So I saw it as a bit of an opportunity. I think reading the report's recommendations, we haven't fully digested them yet, but I think on a top level it was really pleasing to see some of the kind of positive references to the way we do things in Scotland for both ourselves and SQC. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing, for us to do. And I think that's the really important thing. We make sure that we respond to the opportunity. I mean, quality assurance is such an opportunity for us at QMS to help arm our marketing team. And we often overlook the kind of relationship between quality assurance and the marketing of the brands, because when you're looking to create that brand message and that brand value, you have to have something behind it. You can't just have a message that, Scotland produces, high welfare beef. You have to be able to validate it. So that's the exciting bit. It's looking at what we are doing and how we can use it to tell the story of Scottish beef, Scottish lamb and specially selected pork. And we can always do better, and it's something that we've really looked to embed through the organisation over the last few years, and hopefully the new report helps to demonstrate why that's so important.
That's really great, just to set the scene a little bit ahead of our talk in the programme, because we're going to be getting into those recommendations, and I know a lot of the focus has been on the primary producer end, and that listening exercise, I'm aware they've spoken to 3,000 to 4,000 individuals across the supply chain. And I think, like you said, when you first started, Sarah, that listening exercise, getting everyone involved, it's really going to come through. So it's going to be great to really hear what James has to say about that. But just to pick up finally on one of your points right at the start, that what's been keeping you busy, you've of course been down in London for the Taste of Scotland event, a showcase of Scottish food and drink producers. Can you tell us a little bit about your interactions at the event and how important and significant is this event?
Yeah, so Taste of Scotland's a really interesting one because it almost combines the kind of two things that QMS is here to do. So we are here to market the Scotch beef, Scotch lamb, specially selected pork brands, but we're also here, I believe, to market the importance of Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork to Scotland. And they're two slightly different things. One's around getting consumers to pick up packets of Scotch beef and Scotch lamb and pork in retail and butchers, when they're out for a meal. The other's about making sure policymakers, politicians, stakeholders recognise the importance of the red meat sector to Scotland. So Taste of Scotland is it's not quite a trade show, but it is an event for producers that's held in Scotland House, which if anyone ever gets, Dover House, my apologies, Dover House down in London. It's the home of the Scotland office, so it's where Scottish policy is basically ran from in terms of the UK government. And if you have never been down there, the Scots have the best spot on Horse Guards Parade. Trust the Scots, it is a beautiful setting. So they basically invite food and drink producers into Dover House for the day. The first half of the session is around kind of businesses and ambassadors, so really focused on, they'll send invites out to kind of hotel groups, retail groups. So that was an opportunity to make sure the Scotch brands were front and centre there. So Gordon Newlands and Lucy Ozanne and Kate Rowell, were engaging there with, chefs, restaurateurs, tell them about the Scotch Beef Club, which is our main support mechanism for food service, and also the Scotch Butchers Club. We've got some really good Scotch Butchers Club members down in London as well. So it was an opportunity to market those to the audience there. And many thanks to T&G Wholesale, who managed to deliver some canapes using some of the Scotch beef and Scotch lamb for us as well. So they had an opportunity to taste the brand. So that was really cool. And then in the afternoon, or the evening, so after they have the afternoon session, they then have a second session where they invite all the MPs and civil servants as well. So you've kind of got an opportunity in one day to do the two sides of QMS. So it couldn't be more important, to engage particularly with Labour MPs at the moment. One of the big challenges, as you'll know, Claire, following the budget is the kind of the proposal on the new inheritance tax rules and changes to business rates relief. So we see this as something that has really negatively impacted the confidence of businesses. And the other big challenge we have on our plates that's been keeping us busy in January is obviously the reduction in cattle numbers. And there's a direct correlation there that if businesses don't have a secure succession plan, or succession looks to be more challenging because of inheritance tax changes and business tax changes, then that could have a negative impact on cattle numbers further. So it's a really important issue to make sure we're not just in front of retailers and food service businesses. We also need to be influencing policymakers. So that's why it was really important, and a key focus for us is making sure that we are reminding people of the economic importance of the Scottish red meat supply chain to MPs from all parties. So that was us down in London just last week. Seems like a lifetime ago.
Well, it just sounds like such a bit. I mean, you're always doing such busy events every time I speak to you and the team. But like you say, yes, it's a showcase for the great produce that we have, but those talking points and those touch points with politicians right now, so many of the issues that you're mentioning around cattle numbers, and of course around this continued discussion over inheritance tax. I mean, it's really important to be having that. But Sarah, thank you so much. I know you're an incredibly busy woman. You've got so much going on, and I'm sure we can get you back on the podcast in a couple of months' time to share more of us. But thank you so much for your time today.
No problem at all, Claire. Thank you.
Ian, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast, and you've got a roundup for the markets for us, and I hear it's some good news in the beef sector.
Yeah, definitely good news for farmers at the moment. We've seen a huge increase in prices since the summer. 20% since even over the last 6 months. Almost sort of unprecedented weekly increases in January. We're 20% higher than last year, 40% above the 5-year average. And I guess the kind of the potentially surprising, interesting point is that last year was a year of increased beef production in the UK of almost 4%. So we've seen those increases come through at a time of rising production, and both sort of year on year and seasonal. I think we may have had a bit of a tighter start to this year, but volumes are starting to get going now, and the prices are still rising. So a signal that demand is strong.
And is that likely to keep going? Is that what you're thinking until really demand and supply begin to balance out, Ian?
Yeah, so I guess the sort of thinking in terms of supply modelling for this year is that we're going to start to see the reduction in the calf crops of 2023 and 2024 coming through. Mm-hmm. And so that suggests that supply is going to be a bit tighter this year. And that's not just the case here, it's also the case in Europe and in some of the sort of major global producing nations like Australia, and I think Australia might be expecting to start to tighten a bit after expansion. USA is definitely going to tighten, and Brazil is going through a herd liquidation cycle, and is kind of sort of on the down part of that this year. So tight supply, strong demand for beef, kind of across the world really.
And Ian, last time we spoke to you, you'd been predicting some pretty strong farm gate prices with Easter and Ramadan around the corner. And I saw there was a slight dip in January, but then there was a rebound towards the end of the month. How are things looking for sheep just now?
Yeah, so lamb prices rose over the festive period of that kind of lower period of supply as markets, abattoirs shutting down for the holidays. Strong start to the year. Little bit of a dip, but we're still well ahead of last year and sort of 30% above the 5-year average. So markets are looking strong. We have seen that sort of supply increase. Big decline through the first half of the season, and we're starting to see a bit of a catch up in auction abattoir throughput. I would imagine. Certainly that's what we're seeing in the auctions in Scotland. I expect there to be a sort of strong carryover of hogs because production was down so much in the first part of the season. So I think kill is down maybe 7-8% so far. But the June census from Scotland, England, and Wales was showing a small reduction overall of only around 1.5%. So potential for increased numbers in the run up to Easter and through Ramadan, but you'd expect to see strong demand for Ramadan, which kicks off at the end of February, and then Easter into April this year.
And is it similar for beef in terms of internationally? We're seeing a reduction across parts of Europe. Is it similar for sheep?
Yeah, so we've kind of seen a bit of a sort of steady decline in recent years of the European sheep flock. So that's certainly been supporting our export demand. France is the sort of main market, and I guess some of the demographic changes have also been supporting that demand for lamb.
And across pigs, it's a pretty positive outlook as well. I mean, obviously there's been a bit of a confidence rebound since the crisis in 21-22. How are things looking in the pig sector?
Yeah, so we're seeing sort of slow but steady increase in production, it seems, couple of percent. And I guess the sort of notable thing in the pig sector is that we've seen input prices come back after the surge in grain prices and etc. a couple of years ago, and I think the sort of modelling is suggesting that input costs are below where farm gate prices are at the moment, sort of allowing some kind of recovery in finances. Fairly positive. Interestingly, we've seen not seen any major increase in imports from Europe, despite there's a kind of huge price gap of about 30% at the moment. So normally you'd expect that to sort of lower the price of imports or increase the volume, but that's not really come through.
And Ian, just to finish on, what's really keeping you interested looking ahead over the next few months? What are you going to be paying close attention to?
I think it's the kind of speed on the beef side is that, like, if where kind of production goes, if we do see that kind of decline and what that means for the market. And I guess if you would imagine that those rapid farm gate price increases are going to start to come through the supply chain and what that means for consumption. But certainly demand has held up so far. But yeah, I guess if you do see big rise in retail prices, the volume of demand is going to potentially dip back a bit. But you'd hope that people are going to keep spending money on beef, lamb and pork, which they have done in the last 2-3 years of higher prices.
Which is good news for producers. Ian, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
James, thanks so much for joining us on the QMS podcast today. We're going to be discussing the UK Farm Assurance Review. You, of course, have been one of the independent commissioners, been involved in a 9-month process. I'm going to ask you to talk us through a little bit about how did this review materialise in the first place?
Hi, so morning Claire, evening your time. So there were a few catalysts for driving this review and the reason it came to be. The first one was really that we've had farm assurance systems since the 1990s, so we're past 30 years, and in that entire time there hasn't really been any moment where the industry has stepped back, looked at it strategically and thought, is it fit for the purpose? And actually, what will the future look like? So that was one of the big strategic reasons for it. But there was a more current reason as well. There'd been something of a hoo-ha and a bit of a fallout between the industry around an attempt by Red Tractor to bring in new environmental conditions, which was seen to be driven by the retailers. Red Tractor had pushed ahead with that. The industry had then pushed back when they'd seen what had come up. And really that entire process, which was called Greener Farm Commitment that they were putting together, fell apart. So from that, there was a governance review done of Red Tractor itself to look at whether the process they had followed was right, but it also then instigated the 4 UK farm unions and AHDB as the UK-wide levy body to say, look, maybe we need to just take a step back and look at this entire system. And that's when I got a call and 3 other commissioners got a call to lead this process.
It's been 9 months, James. It's been quite an ordeal. What's the engagement been like across the supply chain? What's been involved in this process?
So it's been very evidence-led and a pretty intense process, to be honest. So I went into this knowing there are strong views around farm assurance. I've kicked around the agri-food supply chain for a while now myself. And whenever this topic comes up, there's a lot of strong opinions. The challenge for processes like this is not to try and capture the strong opinions, because that will always happen. People will want to share their views, but it's to look beneath that and see actually what's really driving this and what is the consensus around where farm assurance is just now and where it wants to go. So we did a whole number of things. We wanted to end the process without anyone able to say, I didn't get a chance to have my say. So we did a big survey of farmers. We got about 3,000-4,000 responses, a lot in Scotland as well, across all parts of the country, all different sectors as well. But as well as then having that as a good kind of foundation of evidence, we hit the road. So we spent time in Scotland and Wales and England. I spent 3 days over in Northern Ireland with one of my other commissioners. We went to agricultural shows. And crucially, we met every link in the supply chain, from maltsters to distillers to retailers to the food service sector to consumer groups as well. So the idea was really to collate all this evidence and then try and work out what it was telling us.
It sounds like it's been a really thorough listening exercise across the country, that 3,000 to 4,000 responses. What has been the sort of overarching messages coming out of this? Can you share some of the top lines with us?
So I suppose the really good news is that our conclusion is that farm assurance is really delivering for consumers. So consumers and shoppers and people eating in restaurants, whether they are here or the other side of the world, want assurances on food safety, animal welfare, environmental protection. We think the system is delivering that. But there's no doubt that it has lost some confidence amongst farmers. The system has felt as though it's become overly complex. And one of the really strong messages that came out was the kind of emotional stress and the mental health burden that actually the audit process was placing on farmers, who were feeling as though there were more and more standards coming in. Things are getting more and more complex, and this whole audit process was really becoming make or break. It felt like their entire business lives boiled down to a one inspection on one day. If they pass, they're fine. If not, their business could stop overnight. So on the one hand, the system's doing exactly what you want it to do. It's giving consumers assurances that what they're getting is what they say it is, and it's produced to the best possible standards. But farmers have increasingly said, we feel like farm assurance is done to us rather than delivered with us. And for an industry that really created this for itself, it's by the industry for the industry, there's a greater gap that is now built between farmers and the system. Now, that wasn't true everywhere. And importantly, in devolved areas, we found schemes that were generally more trusted. There was greater collaboration and a more constructive relationship with farmers. And we felt that suppose UK-wide schemes like Red Tractor, there's a lot they could learn by looking in devolved areas. So it wasn't the perfect picture. There's a lot that needs to happen. We've got 9 strategic recommendations. Believe it or not, 56 operational recommendations that sit underneath that. So there's a big to-do list now sitting on the desk of QMS and others. We found a system that was broadly delivering, but it really needs to look at how it can be delivered in a better, more efficient way. Crucially, to bring farmers along with them on the journey so they feel as though they're part of it rather than victims of it.
And James, we're definitely going to get into some of those recommendations. And I know speaking to her, the CEO of QMS, Sarah Mellett, earlier, she really interestingly picked out what you said there about those devolved schemes, of course. But can we strip it back for a second? Why do we need farm assurance? I mean, in your opinion, why is it so important?
So I suppose for me, we go back to when the whole thing came to be. So back in the 90s, there was a decade really of food scares. BSE obviously being the most notable one, which has cast a shadow for a generation really. We also had salmonella, E. coli. So there were lots of different food scares at that time. And the industry, and I think a brilliant example of leadership, decided to grab this whole subject and say, look, let's create a whole assurance, a quality control system, which will allow us to look in the eyes of consumers, shoppers all around the country and all around the world and say, we can guarantee that this food, this product is produced to a set of standards. To me, whilst we have not been through that same era of food scares, in part because we have this quality control system, it's important not to be complacent. We're only one scare, one issue away from your massive reputational problem for the industry. So that core founding reason still exists. But I suppose what's happened over time is that how consumers perceive quality and their demands has changed. So food safety was the initial driving factor. Animal welfare became a massive issue for years, and now we're in an era really of environmental protection, net zero, which is the next generation, I think, of assurance that consumers are expecting. So the same driving reason it was born is still the argument that we need it now. And particularly, I think, for a country like Scotland and the UK on the world stage, we're not going to provide the cheapest food in the world. Our pitch is quality. So we've got to be really world class. And these assurance schemes underpin that. Scotch beef, Scotch lamb, specially select pork. The guarantees that come with that is what gives us a competitive edge in the marketplace. So it's about, I suppose, defence and protection of brand, but it's also about advocacy of that brand and building it globally.
And James, as one of the 4 independent commissioners, of course, for you, you've spent over 10 years at the helm of the industry body Scotland Food and Drink. You have been across the perceptions and the support of different assurance schemes over the year. So I imagine a particularly good fit for this role. I mean, what sort of learnings did you take from your past experience, and how did that make you fit for the purpose for this job then?
So that's a good question. And a few people asked me, I suppose, why I'd done it or indeed why I got asked to do it. I suppose, I've spent all my career in and around agri-food. So as you say, I spent 11 years at Scotland Food and Drink, really beyond the farm gate, trying to take Scottish produce and with lots of others sell it to the world and sell it on our own doorstep. Before that, I spent 11 years at NFU Scotland at the farm gate, seeing some of the issues there. I suppose the advantage I've got now is I've got no vested interest other than a passion for the whole subject. I don't work for assurance schemes. I don't work for assessment bodies. I don't work for Scotland Food and Drink. So I can maybe say it as it is. I'm not paid by anyone for an opinion. So maybe I've got that chance to both have the knowledge of it, which the other commissioners had as well, but also have a slightly outside perspective on it too. And I suppose what I've seen is farmers who, if you mention farm assurance, you can get quite a strong reaction. They see it as more regulation. When you strip that all back, they recognise we need it. If you scrapped it all today, the first thing people are doing tomorrow is setting this thing up. But within the detail of how it works, of how people want to avoid duplication, they want to avoid multiple assessors, whether they're from government or farm assurance, coming down and looking at the same things. They want to embrace technology better. They want to understand why standards are coming in. They want to see if standards are coming in, what standards are coming out. They want to make sure that they're in control of the system, and it's not just a load of big retailers at the end of the supply chain dictating terms, and in some cases passing on what should be their obligations down the supply chain to farmers. So the existential question of do we need farm assurance? There are some farmers that say we don't. We disagree with them. At the end of this process, we don't believe, and that would be the disastrous move. It would be pulling a pin out of a hand grenade in terms of the reputation of the industry. But once you agree that we need assurance, the question is how best do we do it? And that's really what we got into in terms of how do we build this scheme, or all these schemes for the future.
And some of the stuff I've been reading about the findings, and these 9 recommendations, which we will go into just now, James, it's been presented that once these are delivered, that is going to really reinstate that confidence in farm assurance schemes. And if we go into some of them, and just talking there about making them slightly more friendly towards farmers, I did notice that quite a few of them do focus on things like improving communication back to farmers. It's bringing farmers in terms of the development of some of these schemes as well. There's been quite a focus, and of course that thing you mentioned right at the start, concerns over those on-farm audits, really to streamline and reduce some of the pressures. Can you share a little bit about the sort of order and sort of what you've sort of taken from these recommendations?
So the communication point is a really big one. And that's challenging. Let's face it, for every organisation, any system of regulation, any system of anything, communication with your customer base, and farmers are the customer base here, is always challenging. We found, again, in devolved areas, there's a much brighter story. So Red Tractor's got some real challenges. We found they've lost confidence of a significant proportion of farmers in a significant number of sectors. And we found they've been a bit too defensive and entrenched. They see themselves as just existing for consumers, not farmers, and we think that's way too simplistic. What we found in devolved areas was a lot better. So we found QMS, Scottish Quality Crops, they have good relationship with farmers. SQC in particular is a really interesting model. It's a co-op as opposed to QMS. It's an NDPB. It is a collective in itself of that whole supply chain. But we found there was just a much more constructive relationship where it was good. So again, a lot that can be learned south of the border by looking at Scotland. Around the audit piece, that's probably the single biggest area of feedback we got from farmers, and not surprisingly, because that's their interface, right? That's the bit of assurance they really live and breathe each year. And we found concerns about duplication. We found concerns that actually sometimes assessors are too interested in bits of paper rather than the outcomes. Get out and see the stock, see the land. You'll get a good gut feel for how things are going rather than being stuck in a farm office with paperwork up to your eyeballs. But again, there were some really good things happening in Scotland. So where you've got the crop scheme and the livestock schemes, they're comparing notes, so assessments can be done on the same day. The schemes also in livestock across devolved areas in Scotland, Wales and Ireland meet regularly. They share best practice. They share notes on common challenges. That was less the case when on a four-nation basis. So some of these areas in Scotland were working quite well, but there are improvements that need to be done in Scotland too. So technology's got to be a game changer, right? So how do we better embrace technology? And that's challenging in a multi-generational farm business and farm industry that we've got. But there must be a way you can walk around a farm with a phone, click that, spray your MOT, AI knows to drop that document into your LEAF scheme, into your SQC scheme. So how technology is used is going to be important. There's lots of portals being developed, but we found in Red Tractor, we've got farmers that are populating these portals before an assessment with information. Some of the assessors weren't even looking at that before they came out on farm. So we need a much better culture in how that kind of thing is delivered. And there were a variety of other recommendations that we looked at. One of them is what should be the relationship between government regulation and farm assurance. Now, this term earned recognition is used, and in our view, if you're a member of an assurance scheme, that should lead to some kind of benefit when it comes to government regulation. Fewer inspections, you're lower down the risk register, and that kind of relationship between government and farm assurance could be strengthened and improved too.
I think a lot of these recommendations, as I've seen from the huge support that you've received for the report, I'm sure that it's really welcome to so many listeners tuning in. One recommendation I don't think you've touched on just there, which I thought was interesting, was about positioning the UK farming industry in world food markets. Are we currently competitive in terms of our standards globally?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. And post-Brexit, in this new world where UK is an independent trade negotiator, there's obviously been a lot of focus on trade negotiations and trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand now. There's a default of the industry to presume that our standards are way higher than everyone else and that imports are naturally going to be lower standards. That's not always the case. Now, AHDB's doing a lot of work actually to compare standards in livestock sales with standards overseas. In some cases, we are doing well. And the broad ask from the industry, which is not unreasonable in this country, is that imports should meet our standards. Now, what we found was that broadly, our standards are certainly competitive and in some cases are better than others internationally. But we think they need to be. Now, as I say, the UK's opportunity, in Scotland in particular, our opportunity to sell Scotch beef and Scotch lamb to the world will come from having a brand that's stronger, but that brand's got to be underpinned by something. You can have the best beautiful marketing videos and fluffy storylines, but at the end of it, when you strip that away, you need standards, and that's where assurance comes in. And I think there's a very fine line between saying we should just have minimum legal standards, and it's government's job to regulate, versus we want to absolutely gold plate what we're doing. There's a middle ground in there that can work, I think, for Scotland, where we're pushing the boundaries on standards, and we're going to have to push more environmentally because that will create our competitive edge. That gives the ammunition that Sarah and the team at QMS need to stick under their arm and go out and sell, whether they're at huge trade shows in Germany or the Middle East or the Far East or North America.
So what's next, James? I mean, to those listening, what can we do in terms of collaborating on this moving forward between farmers, different stakeholders? What's the next step of the report?
So in a sense, my work here is done and the other commission's work here is done. This now sits with the 4 UK farm unions and AHDB who commissioned this. They were the customers of the piece of work, but it also sits with assurance bodies. So within these myriad of recommendations, every recommendation's got an owner, an organisation or organisation responsible for delivering it, and a time scale. So we've been pretty prescriptive. We've given a fairly hefty to-do list to a lot of people, and I hope they embrace it as an opportunity to be constructive and really to see this as a roadmap for building the system moving forward. It's going to require farmers being involved. The best of what has worked in farm assurance has happened because farmers have been at the heart of it. That's why farm assurance came about. It would never have been created were it not for a few real ambassadors and pioneers in farming that gave rise to it. Those same group of people, that same mentality needs to drive farming on now. There'll be some difficult stuff in there. We're going to have to push the boundaries of environment. It will feel uncomfortable sometimes, but I suppose nothing meaningful ever feels comfortable. So we're going to have to brace that and move it on. But I think if we've got the kind of foundation the likes of QMS has, which is a good relationship with farmers, a governance structure which is open, then that's a pretty good platform to build on. And to be honest, it's a platform that a lot of other assurance schemes would give their right arm for.
And James, if I was asked to ask you to get your crystal ball out and to look to the next 5-10 years, where do you see farm assurance evolving in that time?
So I'm a relentless optimist around this. I do think that Scotland has a unique opportunity in the way that other countries like New Zealand and Ireland and Canada have done to build a global footprint for food and drink. That will require assurance underpinning that. It will definitely have to build greater environmental requirements in, but I think the game changer will be looking how farm assurance is delivered more efficiently with technology at its heart. So farmers will feel as though they're almost in a rolling 24 hours a day, 365 days a year type of assurance system where it's just natural rhythm and muscle memory that they stay assured and they keep on top of things, but technology is really helping them do it rather than their life building towards this big one make or break inspection, which is really stressful and brings a lot of emotional toll. So I think we'll have a system that will evolve because it will have to. I think we've got schemes that understand why they need to evolve, that are willing to work well with farmers on the ground, and we'll end up building a platform that will hopefully catapult Scottish food and drink, and certainly Scotch beef and Scotch lamb, especially salt pork, to a new era, hopefully profitability too, both in markets here and overseas.
And lastly, James, I have to ask you, you said it at the top of the interview there, this has been sort of 30 years in the making, this happening. What's it been like to be involved in such an important process that is really going to shape so many big conversations? It's really going to empower the primary producers and so many of the different industry bodies. What's that been like for you on a personal level as well as a professional one?
So it's been really interesting. I think when you've kind of worked in and around the system for a long time, it's dead easy to fall into the trap of thinking you know everything and you know how all the moving parts work. And I sometimes think I know that. And then I do a process like this and you realize you don't. And you get into the depths of 12, 13, 14, 15 different schemes, how they work, every single part of that supply chain. And so every day is still a school day, which is a cliche, but it's absolutely true. It's been a really fascinating exercise. If anyone is ever asked to be involved in these kind of reviews, honestly, I would say yes. I guarantee at various points you will regret it. You will wonder what on earth you've decided to do and inflicted upon yourself, because you find yourself surrounded by an avalanche of evidence and you wonder how on earth you're going to navigate your way through it. But you do. You feel as though hopefully you can give a bit of an instruction manual for the future. It won't be perfect. We won't have got everything right. But hopefully it gives a bit of a framework to kind of drive the industry forward. So it's been fascinating, interesting. I've learned a lot. I've remembered that I still have a lot to learn despite, being around this kind of world for a long, long time. So if anyone gets asked to do this, you may have your doubts. I understand why, but I would definitely get involved. These are really interesting and insightful processes, and doing it as part of a team, which I've been able to do, has been great as well, because you bounce off each other and you kind of develop ideas as you go.
James, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen for more monthly episodes as we continue to explore the vital topics affecting the red meat industry. If you want to stay updated with the latest news in our sector, be sure to sign up for the weekly QMS newsletter by emailing info@qmsscotland.co.uk. Join us next time for more insights from experts, farmers and industry leaders. But until then, stay connected with us on our social channels and keep up with the latest news from Quality Meat Scotland.